our other calls. Oops. Most of you know, I'm Patty Breslin, and I'm with San Leandro 2050. I appreciate you being here tonight. And we'll get started just by reminding you that, again, I know a lot of you have been on previous calls, but we have had a series of events over the last couple of months around the resilient home, and all the ones that we've done so far are available on our recordings page, and the one that's coming soon, very, very soon, in the next few minutes, will also be there as of, I don't know, tomorrow or the day after. So, and I'll send out a recording and the presentation to everybody that's here today. So moving on. So tonight we're going to have a couple of different people speaking. We have Laura Allen, who's with Greywater Action in Berkeley, and she's going to give an overview, sort of a Greywater overview 101. We're going to hear from somebody in San Leandro who has installed a system, and hear how that went and what some of those experiences were. We then are going to go back to Laura, that's going to give you the step-by-step of how to get started and process in the process so that you can get your very own system going. And then there's a few resources and not a lot of rebates, but there's a couple of things that you might want to check out. And then, of course, Q&A. So we have a pretty small group tonight. So if we want to ask questions, I don't know, if something really is, pertinent to the time that we're, something that we're talking about, go ahead and raise your hand, and you can unmute yourself and we can take questions as we go. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura Allen. And Laura, if you can just let me know when you want me to advance the slides, that would be great.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming, everybody. Yeah, next slide.
Next one.
Yeah, just right there is good. Just so I'm Laura Allen. Oh, go ahead. If you could go back one. With the organization called Greywater Action, and we're a fiscally sponsored project of the Ecology Center in Berkeley. And we do a lot of online stuff now, but we also do some hands-on classes with other nonprofits around the Bay Area as well as Los Angeles area. And we're going to talk about how you can take water from your own home and send it outside. And before I do that, next slide, I'm going to talk about rainwater a little bit, because that was a topic of interest. And rainwater is another great resource to use when we have it. So this is, I think, the only slide on rainwater, but if you have questions, feel free to ask them. There's many ways to collect rainwater on your site. You can think a bit of it as an auxiliary supply of water, something that you can use either directly in the ground in a rain garden, just prevent it from leaving your property, or you can collect it in barrels or tanks. And this image shows 4 different styles of collection. The number 1 is just showing a single rain barrel, and that's something that's really easy to do and get started. Sometimes there's giveaway programs, sometimes there's rebates to get them. You can also purchase one. That's about 50 gallons, so it's really not a lot, but it's a great way to get started with rainwater harvesting. And it's also a really good educational tool to see how much irrigation your landscape needs. 50 gallons in the summer does not go very far, as you may or may not be aware. But I definitely think that rain barrels are helpful to just make us more aware of water, as well as a way to start shifting us to be able to use the water that we already have without tapping into our supplies that usually come from quite far away. So that's number 1. Number 2, you can connect rain barrels together. And then if you have somewhere on your property, maybe under a deck, or sometimes like behind the garage, or there are these little, I'll call them dead spaces that aren't utilized for other things, you can put a bunch of rain barrels, connect them all together, and then you can really build your capacity. So those in that image, that number 2 is 8 rain barrels. So that's about 200 gallons. Is that right? 400 gallons of water under that porch. Then you get to the larger containers, the tanks. Those can be from a couple hundred gallons up to many thousands of gallons. Image number 3 is showing a tank that's about a 3,000 gallon size. Image number 4 is showing a tank that's about 10,000 gallons, just in relationship to that 1-story house or with a attic-y area. Most people don't have room to put a 10,000 gallon tank in an urban yard, but you never know. Maybe some of you have friends or relatives, or maybe you're going to live somewhere else in the future. But we really can collect a lot of water. There's tons of potential, and it's really about allocating money and space to the collection tank. I always encourage people to put, whatever you can. It's also a great source of emergency water. If the water supply goes out, you can treat it like you're camping. You can have a little, backpacking filter or tablets and use that as emergency supply water. So you can get that double benefit of using it for irrigation as well as for having extra water in case of emergency. So that's rainwater. And I see a question about discounts. I don't know if there's ongoing discounts, but yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm not sure about that. I know there have been in the past, but I don't know of any right now. I'd probably ask East Bay Mud. I didn't actually check for rain barrel discounts. They do offer a greywater one.
I know that it's something that you can also find sometimes on used sites, like people have some barrels that they are not using or don't want anymore. And so you can kind of go in and check around on Craigslist or Marketplace or things like that.
Yeah.
And if I think of any other, there's another woman who's involved with Salient 2050 who actually has, I think, a 3,000 gallons worth of barrels on her site. And she told me about ways of doing that. So I may, when I send out the slides, I'll also send out some info on, how you might get started or look for rain barrels that are well priced.
Great.
Next slide.
Next slide. And so now the rest of my portion of this is to share with you the resource of greywater. And greywater is a great source of irrigation. Our landscapes usually use about half of the water, the total water. Of course, that varies depending on the house and the landscape, but generally speaking, we use about half the water inside and half outside. And our plants don't need the same quality as water as we do, which is why greywater is a really great match. We can monitor our products and make it a good source of irrigation water for our plants. Next slide. So greywater comes from washing machines, it comes from showers and baths, and it comes from bathroom sinks. In California, kitchen sink water is not considered greywater, though in other states like Oregon and Washington, it is considered greywater. So that's just kind of a weird little thing about greywater. But for you guys to know that you cannot get a permit in a reasonable manner for a kitchen greywater system, but you can get permits, or you don't even need permits for some of these systems for all the other sources of greywater. Next slide. And so I'm going to talk about kind of some general facts about greywater before you see a system, and then after that I'll go through the steps to design your own. Next click, there'll be some bullets coming up. Or all at once. Okay, so first fact about greywater, it's a vastly underutilized resource. In California, people collectively discharge about 1 billion gallons of it every single day. So it's a huge quantity of water that could really be utilized to offset our demand on other water sources. We make greywater all year long. So that's a really benefit. It's an advantage to over rainwater. Rainwater, we have a rainy season and then there's no rain when we actually need the most water because we're irrigating. Greywater, we make it the same amount all year long. So it's really helpful in our Mediterranean climate. Another fact is what is quote unquote best. It really depends on your situation. So there's a lot of variables depending on how your house is built, depending on where your landscape is in relationship to your house. Like, is your yard going downhill or do you have an uphill slope? Things like that affect what system is going to work best for you. And the next thing is the quality of the water. So you, at a residential scale, you have total control over the quality of water because you put the stuff in the water. So if you choose products that, I'll call them plant friendly, those are products that are low in salts and don't have boron. If you choose those type of products, your greywater is going to be a very high quality irrigation water. Some people may not, and then their greywater is going to be terrible for their plants. It could even be hazardous for their plants. And so when you if you're reading about gray water or hearing things about it, people might say these kind of blanket statements about quality of gray water. And whenever somebody gives a blanket statement about the quality of it, it's just not going to be true because it depends on what people put down the drain. You can give a blanket statement about like wastewater, everyone's getting all mixed together, but you just can't say that about one specific household because they can choose to make the quality very high if they just have a little bit of information. And the last fact that I want to emphasize is you're only going to save water if you replace existing irrigation. So gray water, it has the potential to save a lot of water, but it doesn't inherently save any water. If you just dump it out in your yard and then keep watering as you had been before, you're not going to save any water. So you have to design your system so you're directing it to your plants that need irrigation, and now you don't irrigate them the way you used to, and then you're going to see water savings. And so in the next part, when I talk a bit later, I'll go through how you do that, so how you can see the most savings for your particular site. Next slide.
Oh, sorry, I don't know what's going on here. Hang on. That's it. And then, okay, so is this right?
Yeah, that was the general info. Now,
okay, this is the general system. Okay, so now we're going to have Rosa jump in here and talk about her experience.
Hello, hi, I'm Rosa. I live in the north part of San Leandro, and I'll provide the resident experience on gray water today. So please take everything I say with a grain of salt and listen to the gray water expert Laura on this call. So anyway, we have 3 gray water systems that are watering 2 fruit trees and an ornamental tree in our backyard. And I'll go into each system in a little bit more detail shortly. So they were installed by contractors in the last couple of years as part of larger home improvement projects. Some were planned projects and others were, little problems that turned into bigger projects, like a rotten board on deck and plugged up sewer system. So anyway, I have had a great interest in gray water for a long time and have had many years of planning and lots of links and Pinterest things that I've been saving. So I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted when the time came. On the next slide, please. I have a quick schematic of our 3 systems. All 3 are towards the back side of the house where our bathrooms are located. So the first system is on the very left here in that little diagram, where the green pipe shows the water flow to the sanitary system and the purple pipe goes to the yard. The first one is the shower on the left. It drains via gravity into a planter. The second system is to the right top, and it does something similar, except there was no location for a valve, and I'll go into more detail over there. So we actually got an actuator valve installed onto the house that's activated through a switch. And the third system is from our laundry to the yard, and there we have the washer itself that has like a built-in little pump that gets some of the water out more easily. And then on to the next slide. So this first system, I call it shower to landscape. So you'll see in the picture that the shower is just on the other side of the wall where the pipe is coming out. So it's not super convenient if you have to switch from landscape to sewer, but we only do that when we clean the shower, which probably doesn't happen as often as it should. The pipe closer to us that you see on the screen is the one coming out from the shower drain. Then it turns and goes right to the sewer. If it goes to the right, that's a sewer. To the left is where the planter is at. And depending on the position of the valve, you'll see that we actually use the pool valve. That's the gray and black one that you kind of see in the picture. We also have an extra valve that was just a mistake. But anyway, we usually have it on the open position all the time since, we want to water that area. Also of note is that we have a pretty robust hair drain catcher thingy in the shower. So that doesn't get plugged up. We only had the system for a couple of years, so I'm not sure, how well that works, but so far so good. Then on the landscape side, we have the purple box where the water dumps into. We filled it with drain rock, and then I made a gravel sock that's like filter fabric wrapped around gravel or rocks, and it kind of spreads out the water in our little planter there. We have a little plum tree in there and a bunch of California native seeds, and they're growing really well. Now this project was part of a bathroom remodel. So we spend maybe $600 on labor and another $100 for material, but it's not super accurate because it was part of a larger project. So if I think you do it standalone, it'll probably be more expensive than that. And then our next slide is our next system. That's our bathtub to landscape. That's the one where we have, oh, next slide, please. Where we have the valve under the house. Our house is a little bit raised, so there's a little bit of a crawl space that's maybe, 3-4 feet, so it wasn't too awful, but we had a contractor do it. So that actuator valve itself is under the house. On the right-hand side of the picture, you'll see that's the switch inside the bathroom. So again, we have a fancy hair drain catcher on our bathtub. And then on the outside, the pipe comes out under our wooden deck and then continues underground until it goes to the root ball of our nectarine tree. So again, we covered the stuff with rock, mainly because we had extra rock from another project. And that's in case, we dig around there that, we know that there's a pipe there and we don't break the pipe by accident. And then we also have the purple box to mark the exit location and then planted like a seed monkey, like a California native that likes water nearby. Again, this was part of an emergency sanitary sewer fix when our sewer plugged up. So maybe it was $1,000 for labor and material, but again, part of a larger project. And it did involve a little bit of electrical work because of the actuator valve. Okay, and then the next slide, that's the laundry system, laundry to landscape. So there, that's probably the most common one that you'll see, since that doesn't require any permits and can be done DIY a little bit more easily. But again, we didn't do it ourselves. There we have a manual valve in the laundry room. You can't see it in the picture. Ignore the metal pipes because those are mostly for water and then for electric water heater. But anyway, you'll see that there is a brass valve with a yellow handle. I say natural gas because that's usually for natural gas, but you can use that valve for this as well, I think. There we also have an auto vent, which is that little black thing that's sticking out on top. That usually goes in the highest part of the system so that you don't have any plugged whatever water. The gray hose is coming from the laundry machine. That's usually lower. I just raise it up so you can see it better in the picture. So anyway, that's on the inside. On the outside, the pipe comes out of the house. The lower left picture shows it when it was first installed. They just had the pipe come through our stucco wall. Then they cut it, put an elbow, ran it alongside the house, and then it went underneath our path. I was going to then take it and branch it out to the various fruit trees, but I never got around to it. So it kind of just lives in the box and kind of waters the potato bush tree thingy that we have over there, and planted some other plants that can handle the water. One word of caution there is that we actually have a manzanita plant nearby that does not like summer water. So after maybe a few months of using it, we saw that the leaves were turning brown. So we ended up having to shut that off in the summertime because it couldn't handle this water. So anyway, in terms of the cost, again, it was part of a larger project. Incremental cost was maybe $600, but again, probably more if it's a standalone project. All right, then the next slide is just considerations for installation. So the next slide says, so what type of system works for you? So we obviously did the laundry and the shower. We also looked into having our sink connected to the toilet, but that didn't end up working out for us because we actually have a pedestal sink and no good place to put it and make it all work. So anyway, didn't move forward with that. Other considerations are location of your drain versus, what you're watering, access to your pipes, how tall is your crawl space, and then, do you have enough fall to get to the outside? Like, do you need a pump or is it just gravity? Other considerations are the plants, where you need water and when. So since our yard is mostly California natives and they're pretty established, most of our plants, we didn't really need most of the water. So I think, if you have a fruit tree, we planted that and that worked really well. So I think fruit trees are the ones that could benefit the most in our particular yard just because of our choice of landscaping. Also, we did most of our work when there was a big supply chain issue the last couple of years. So we had a really hard time getting hold of valves. We did find a great resource, waterwisesupply.com, that had all kinds of bundles of gray water stuff that you can purchase directly. Because I did spend a lot of time at Home Depot getting super frustrated because you couldn't find anything, and you couldn't order anything online easily. So anyway, I put that in the link in terms of a good place to find stuff. And anyway, let's see. I guess great examples in this webinar, I think that will be coming up, and also lots of things that I found on websites, especially in Australia and Arizona, where water is an even bigger issue than it is here. And then the next slide I have are considerations for operations. So here are some changes that you may need to make once you have gray water that Laura kind of talked about already. One is soaps. So even if you use natural soaps, they're not necessarily good for gray water. So for example, I use a lot of baking soda for my laundry to boost my detergent. So there I have to switch to gray water, to vinegar as a booster, because sodium, boron, borax, all those things listed there are really bad for gray water. Another resource that I found was this blog spot that had like a list of all kinds of products that are good for gray water and some that are not so good. Let's see, other operational consideration include, what you're going to do when you're cleaning your bathtubs, whether you use, cleaning products that don't have baking soda in it. Anyway, that's something to consider. Also protecting the pipes from sunlight and UV rays. I think you saw some of my pictures. We don't do that quite yet. That's later. Hopefully I'll be painting the pipes or covering it up so that they don't degrade, the ones that are outside. Using those hair catchers and the strainers. I put a picture of one of our strainers in there. They're pretty fancy and they catch a lot of hair, better than some of the typical typical ones that you see. And then I'm not sure if it's a good practice or not, but we try to use cold water whenever possible, especially for laundry. Obviously, when we take baths and showers, it's still warm. Hasn't seemed to affect the system a whole lot, but anyway, just something you might want to think about. And then I have one more slide. That's the next one. So before we had our gray water systems, we used buckets in the shower for water to warm up and rinse water, and then we carried it outside afterwards. I've seen folks online that do that with a siphon from the bathtub through a window, like using aquarium hoses, but we never got to it. But anyway, there's other ways of doing it if you're not ready to put in a whole system. And I would say even now with our systems in place for like the sink water in the kitchen, we use the rinse water for washing salads and then water the plants indoors. And usually, go out to the porch and water those plants. We usually stack our dishes in the sink. So when we wash our hands, that kind of gets a pre-soak before it goes in the dishwasher. And you try for quick showers, doesn't really work all the time. And anyway, so for gray water systems, why do it all? I think aside from conserving this very important resource, I also think about, the whole toilet to tap thing. I think that's going to happen within our lifetime, and I'm kind of scared of it. But even though, it's all good. They're already doing it in Southern California. So trying to prolong it so we don't have to do it here before too long. Here's a picture of my dad at the Exploratorium where they had a little exhibit. It wasn't about gray water, but it was a fun little photo op where it's toilet to tap, a little too literal. And then I took a picture at SF MoMA just this weekend. Their bathrooms use gray water for their toilets, which is something I think is really cool. And that's all I have. I'm going to give it back to Laura.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So Laura.
Yeah. I love seeing people's gray water systems. Thanks, Rissa, for sharing. So I'm going to kind of take a step back and just be very general, like kind of considerations that all of you will go through, knowing that your particular site is going to be very unique. And there's basically 5 steps, and this can help you have a successful greywater system. And this image in the back, this is a really common greywater type landscape. I'm assuming that people on this call don't have like giant green lawns, but many people who hear about greywater think that they're just going to be able to keep their giant green lawn and not have to worry about water ever again. And that's just completely not the situation. So greywater is going to be great for your big plants. So you'll see landscapes that are very water efficient, like they have California natives, and then they have the plants that like more water, like the fruit trees, or maybe some select more higher water use plants. So notice that in the picture. You can see in this picture, there's those little lavender rectangles in the mulch and around the landscape, and that's where the greywater is coming out to irrigate certain portions of this landscape. Next slide. So the first step is to understand your options. And if you can click again, I think I'll show you a couple of the different options. So I encourage people to focus on what I'll call the tried and true systems. There's greywater is just water, and we have pipes and we have valves and we have fittings, and there's many ways you can get water from point A to point B. And there's many ways that people get really creative and playful and experimental, and that's all totally fine. But if you just want a system that's going to work and that you can understand the maintenance requirements of it, then I'll kind of steer you to the ones that other people have done for many years. Because out there on the internet, you'll find lots of things. And I personally have done lots of experimentation in my past and kind of came around to like, oh, simple is going to be better for me for the long term, because I actually don't like doing maintenance. I want my systems to be very simple. So I'll talk about what these are in a second. Then you want to pick a system that meets your needs. Looking at how much it costs, how complicated it is to install. Can you find an installer, or can you do it yourself? And then the maintenance requirements. So making sure that that's going to be feasible for you to keep up for the long term. Next slide. So the first system is the Longita landscape, and Rosa mentioned that. Currently, there's no permit required in California. There's some basic health and safety guidelines you have to follow. They're all very doable, and you can often get a rebate. Sometimes it's small. I believe your East Bay Mud gives like $50. Some communities give much bigger rebates, like Marin Water was giving a big one, and so was in San Jose, they were giving a big rebate. So you can always, ask for more if you're not happy with your rebate size. But basically, you're taking your laundry machine, it has a pump in it, it pumps out the water, and instead of just pumping it right to the sewer, you intercept that water with a valve. It allows you to control the flow. So one side of the valve directs back to the sewer where it used to go. The other side directs out to the landscape to your new greywater irrigation system. So this image is just showing you kind of a schematic. It's coming out of the wall. You might be able to go through the floor, not your crawl space, but you do have to be able to get outside. It can go on a flat yard. It can go on a downward sloping yard. This can't go up a hill. So the pump in your machine is not super strong, but it is strong enough to move water, usually about 50 feet across a flat yard. And then you have different points where the water is distributed. Maybe you have just one point if you have a lot of a thirsty plant right there, but most people have several outlets to direct the water to. So they're watering more of the landscape. And that's kind of about it. The materials are a couple $100. It's usually a 1 or 2 day project. It's definitely a do-it-yourself project if you feel comfortable like putting in, maybe you put in an irrigation system, maybe you've like fixed a window that's broken, or, kind of basic construction projects. It is physical work, so it's, it's not nothing, but it's not too complicated. Also, you can hire somebody. Next slide. And we'll go one more slide. So here's some pictures. The picture on the left, that is, oops, if you could go back one more, just to those pictures. Picture on the left, that's a row of fruit trees. And so those green circles, that's where the water's coming out, irrigating that row of fruit trees. The picture on the right, that's an established landscape that had different perennial plants. And so the greywater's coming out just in a few points within that landscape to irrigate those lower water use plants. But it's the plants can access the water and are very happy with it. Next slide. So the next kind of system is a gravity flow system called a branch drain. In Rosa's site, she just had one outlet, and this is a variation of that where the water, it comes to one point, but then it's divided into two different flows of water, and then it can be divided again, so you can have multiple outlets. And to decide how many outlets you need, it's based on how much water your home produces and then how much irrigation needs the plants have. So there's a little bit of calculating that you do with the gray water system, so you have a good match. So you look at your gray water coming out of the home, how much do the plants need, and you want to match it up. Sometimes it matches up to one plant or one location. Often it matches up to multiple plants, multiple locations. But this system, it's all distributed by gravity, which is really nice. There's no moving parts, nothing to break. The water just flows out and goes into these subsurface basins to irrigate the roots of the plants. The cost, I think the next click will give us the costs. Couple $100. Oh, it didn't, a few more, a little bit more than the laundry system. And with that system, you actually have to alter your plumbing. So you need someone who's confident to cut into the plumbing and redirect it. Sometimes that's really simple, like takes an hour. Other times it's really complicated. You might have old plumbing, you might have to reconfigure all the pipes, and it could be like a multi-day project for an experienced plumber. And that really just depends on your house. So it's hard to estimate how much that will cost. And this type of systems do trigger permits if you're getting a permit because you are changing the plumbing of your home. Next slide. Sometimes people have landscapes that are elevated above the drainage of the shower or bath, or sometimes like the laundry is in the basement, and then you do need to pump out the water. There can be very simple pumped gray water systems. The picture on the left is showing gray water coming out of the house into a tank that's going to be buried somewhere in the landscape. Usually it's right outside the house. Sometimes it's even like under the house in a access point. But basically the water flows into this tank. It's not too big. It's just temporarily collecting the water, and then it's pumped out to the landscape. There's no filtration, so the gray water, all the lint and debris is still flowing out, and that gets dealt with in the landscape using usually wood chips is a nice landscape filter to use for the gray water. The picture on the right, this is a type, it's a company that makes a pump that's made for people who have basement laundries or even basement showers, and it pumps it out. So it's made to pump out gray water, and it's a really simple way to pump gray water because it's all compact and designed for it. So you just plumb the gray water in, and then it pumps it out, and you can distribute it into your landscape. Anytime you're pumping gray water with an external pump, that also triggers a plumbing permit or a gray water permit. Next slide. So then there's systems where you pump the gray water and you filter it before you get into the landscape. And this is going to be it's going to cost more and be more complex, but it gives you the flexibility of using a special drip irrigation tubing. So if you want the gray water to kind of function similarly to your other types of irrigation, if you have drip, you do have to filter it because unfiltered gray water will clog any small opening. So there are specialized systems, the drip stuff is not going to be your standard drip tubing. It's going to be made for dirtier water, but it functions just like drip tubing that you're probably familiar with. And so that gray water can do that. And for yards that need that type of irrigation, it's definitely suitable. I do encourage people to kind of leave it as a system that you only would use if you really need to, because it does have additional cost, and the filters do need to be cleaned. So it's much more prone to failure because people don't always clean their filter. Though you can get a maintenance contract with someone else to clean your filter, that can be successful. But if you don't have that, then left to our own devices, we don't clean things. We, being humans, do regular maintenance for the long term. So just be aware of that if you're interested in filtered gray water systems. Next slide. There are other types of systems that are more like whole house systems. So these are typically installed in new homes or major remodels where all the plumbing's being redone. These are two companies. Water Lab is one, a Bay Area company. Their installation arm is called Water Sprout, and they do high-end new construction typically. And they take all the gray water and they send it to a very kind of sophisticated system that that filters the gray water, sends it out, is able to monitor it. If the system runs out of gray water, it can pull in another source of water, maybe a rainwater supply. Runs out of that, it can pull in the municipal water. Sophisticated system. And the cost, it's significantly more expensive. These are in the like $10,000 to $15,000 or maybe even more range. So you've left the like couple $1,000, and now you're in the $10,000 to $20,000 range. But they have a lot more capacities. The other company on the left, Water Renew, they make kind of a mid-range system that is similar. You can monitor it on smartphones, and it does filter and have this automatic way to clean out the filter. So if you're interested in like a whole house, kind of more higher end type system, these are two that you could start looking into. Next slide. So those were kind of understanding your options. And I want to clarify that no matter what gray water system you have, no matter if you filter it or have a fancy system or a really simple system, none of the systems are going to take out the things that could be harmful to your plants. So you need to think about your products no matter what kind of gray water system you have. Luckily, it's really easy to make your gray water, I'll call it plant friendly. You just need to avoid salt. So high levels of salt. You can have a tiny bit of salt, but you don't want to have like powdered detergents because that's full of salt. So avoid salt and don't have any boron. Boron's a plant mycotoxin. If it builds up in your soil, it could harm your plants. You don't want to have chlorine bleach. You can have a vinegar, hydrogen peroxide bleach. There's lots of other things you can have, and you can always shut off your systems. You always have that option of rerouting it to the sewer when you need to do something that's not going to be good for your plants. Just to be clear that this is not like if you do it 1 time or 2 times or probably even 10 times, you're not going to see any impact. It's the regular use of these products over time. If they build up in your soil, they can harm your plants. So you want to make sure that your product, you have safe products that are going to be used on a regular basis. And also you don't need to really have like stress or anxiety about occasionally using the wrong product or someone visiting and using the wrong product once or so. I would caveat that with like hair dye or hair bleach or something that's really harsh. You don't ever want that going out your gray water system. But the general products, on occasion, not a big deal. Here's a couple of examples of products that are good for gray water, and there's more too. So next slide. So another consideration is gray water is not potable, and there's some considerations that you may not think of since we're really used to watering with potable water. You don't want to drink it or have people have unknowingly contacting the water, so it should never pool up or run off. It should really just be soaking into the ground. The code requirement is a 2-inch cover in California, and the reason for that is to make sure people aren't accidentally encountering like puddles of gray water. Gray water has nutrients in it. And if you think about nutrients going to your fruit tree, that's good. That's called fertilizer, and that's a good thing for your tree. But if we put nutrients into another source of water, like a creek or a river or the bay, nutrients are pollution. They cause algae to grow and pollute the water. So your gray water, you should never use it if you're too close to a creek or a river. In California, it's 100 feet setback. That's the requirement. So if you have a creekside property, you need to irrigate away from the creek. So be 100 feet away. You also don't want to be near a storm drain because you don't want the gray water untreated to go into the storm drain and get into a creek. Once it gets into the soil, the nutrients in it are going to be used up by the plants, and it'll be filtered out by the soil. The last thing is about edibles. You should not water root vegetables or any edible where the gray water touches the part you eat, and that's to avoid directly ingesting gray water. You can safely water fruit trees or any plant that has food that you eat off of it, as long as the food's above the ground and the gray water's below the ground. And of course, you can water non-food plants too, any plant that you want to irrigate. Next slide.
Oh, I think you already did that, right?
Oh, yep.
Okay.
Next slide. Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize I had it written. Okay, so those are kind of understanding your options. Now we're on step 2, looking at your site. So just briefly, the slope of your site has an impact, whether it's uphill or downhill or flat. The plants you want to irrigate, that's going to impact it. Bigger plants don't need filtered gray water, but if you have a lot of really small plants over a wide area, you're going to need to send it through a drip system. Your soil. If you have very slowly draining soil, you're going to need to distribute the water over a larger portion of it so you don't have pooling of gray water. Your plumbing, that's going to sometimes it impacts your options. Like if you have slab on grade construction, your shower pipes are literally buried in cement and it's not easy at all to get to them. So sometimes you might find out some of your gray water sources are just infeasible for your particular site, or maybe you can do them all. It just, depends on your home. Next slide. Oh, yeah, I already said all that. We can skip that.
Skip this?
No, that was skip the word. So this, I think
Okay,
there's a little lag between you and what I'm seeing. So just showing you another picture of a kind of classic gray water landscape. You can see there's our bigger plants, there are bushes, there are low water or a select few of water needing plants. Next slide. So now you're ready to choose your system. And if you click again, I think we'll see the list of them. Longitude landscape, I encourage people to start with that as looking if it's going to work for them because of the ease of installation typically, and it's very flexible. Then there's the gravity flow systems. If you are able to do them, you might need to pump the water. Simple pump systems work really well. Pumped and filtered ones can also work with proper maintenance. And next slide. Then you'll design it. Next slide. And with the design, this is where if you're doing this to save water, this is where you don't want to rush the design process, because to maximize your water savings, you want to figure out how much does your home produce and how much do your plants need, and then you match them. Sometimes regulations impact your design depending on if you're getting a permit or not getting a permit and where you live. And then you're always wanting to think about, the health and safety requirements. So make sure your system is going to be safe for everybody. And if you're getting a permit or following the code, or you're following kind of best practices based on resources, then your system will be safe for you and the environment. Next slide. So now you either build the system yourself or you hire somebody. Next slide. So making sure that you understand the skill level required, depending on what system you want to put in, knowing where to go for parts. Some of them do need to be ordered. So if you're doing this yourself, you want to make sure you time it properly so you can get the parts you need. And if you're working with a contractor, making sure that I really encourage people to be clear about what you want. I've seen many times contractors, they might think they know what to do, or they might maybe have done this once, and maybe they're not particularly gray water experts, and they convince people to do something that's actually maybe not the best idea. So just educating yourself in general terms and making sure you can communicate that to your contractor so they can build a system that's going to be the right one for you. You can always share resources with them, books, diagrams, there's lots out there. But just because they're a contractor doesn't mean that they are necessarily the most knowledgeable about this particular type of system. Next slide. And so here's some resources. Greywateraction.org is the website. There we have lots of links to other things. We have online education. I've written a couple of books to help people install these systems. Greywater Green Landscape is one just targeted at greywater, and that's a great thing to share with the contractor if you're working with someone else, or if you want to build it yourself. It takes you step by step through the design process and installation. And there's a lot of resources. Locally, the Urban Farmer Store is a place you can get many of these parts, as well as the Waterwise Supplies, I believe it's called, to order. And right now you can get a $50 rebate from EdMud. So I'm going to end there and see if there's questions. There might be one more slide, I think, about some of our online classes. Not sure.
Nope. Doesn't seem.
Great. Then we're at the end. So any questions?
Yeah. If you want to raise your hand or put it in the chat, either one. Let's see, chat, what we have. Let's see.
I see a question about shower water is capturing it before showering, like the clear. So when you turn on your shower and you're collecting the water as it heats up, that water is not dirty at all. It's just right out of the tap. So you can use that water however you wish. It's not actually gray water until it's gone down the drain. So yeah, that's fine to use any way you want.
Can you talk about how to regulate the water flow given our different seasons and given the specific needs of plants, typically handled by carefully timed irrigation systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so that's where you kind of have to make what type of system you need to decide overall what's going to be better for you. With the simple gray water systems, once you design it and send the water out, you don't have a lot of control. So you can, though, if there's a plant that you maybe want to water every so often, you can put it on one line and then shut that one off, but it's going to be manual, and manual things are not really, they're not really sustainable for the long term for people, especially busy people. So I recommend people, if they have parts of their landscape that's going to work well, to do a simple system, because those ones are typically going to last longer and are more affordable for more people. And knowing that you're not going to be always meeting the plant water requirements. You can shut it off in the winter, of course, you turn it off when you don't need irrigation, but some of the time you might be over irrigating. And as long as you don't have poor draining soils, you're not going to harm the plants. You just will be not being as efficient as possible with your water. So that's, one answer. The other side of it is you can go to the sophisticated gray water systems that do operate on time irrigation, and they can, distribute the water to meet irrigation cycles. But then the cost is very much higher and the complexity is. And so for many people, that's just not attainable for them. So if you have enough resources to make that happen and you want to have a more sophisticated system, then there is that option. It's just the cost is the problem for most people.
Okay. And then there's a question from Joe who asks, how do you turn off and turn on the gray water for in the shower? So, I think it's like, is there an off on?
There's so the valve typically comes just a manually controlled valve, and then people often add an actuator like Rosa had, where it's a motor that just sits right on the valve, and then it's a plug-in, like a low voltage motor, and then you just plug it in and have a switch in your house. So it's easy to add into your system, and then you'd have a switch somewhere that you just flip the switch to turn it on or off.
Okay. And how much is the gray water permit in San Leandro? I don't know.
Yeah, in Oakland, it's the lowest cost of the having one inspection type permit. So last time I checked, it was 100 and something. Yeah, it varies.
Yeah, it's a city question. I just don't know. But actually, I'll send an email too and see if I can get any information about the permits in general. And I'll also send that out with the presentation. Somebody had asked when this was going to be up, and sometimes I get them up the next day and sometimes I don't. So I can't commit to tomorrow, but it might be tomorrow, but more likely the next day. And then how do you save a large quantity of water in rain barrels for use in the summer without growing bacteria?
So your rain barrels should be screened so mosquitoes can't enter the barrel. That's the biggest potential problem with rain barrels, is growing mosquitoes, and you don't want to do that. And then the barrel should be opaque so sunlight doesn't get in. And if it's screened and sunlight can't get in, the quality is going to be fine for storing till the summer.
The other thing about I'm fascinated about the rain barrel thing personally, and we have a community garden at Bethel Church, and we had somebody come talk to us about putting in 5,000 gallon tanks there. And one of the things that you can do is for like $300, I think you can get a UV cleaner of the water so that you can actually, in times of emergency, it makes the water safe to drink, which I thought was a pretty low cost type of thing to be able to add to rain barrels. for the peace of mind potentially. So anyway, I thought I'd throw that in there.
And that's only for rainwater, right? Not for gray water.
Yes, yeah, I would never say gray water. Gray water is never potable. Is potable. Is that right, Laura?
That's right. Yeah. Rainwater, if you want to store something up to drink later, store rainwater and filter it, not gray water.
Yeah. So yeah. All right. Well, yeah, I'll look into the permit costs and I will send it with the presentation. Any other questions, folks? I don't see any in the chat. Yeah, I think we got all of them out of the chat. Okay. Well, if we don't have more questions, then I want to thank our presenters, Laura and Rosa. Really appreciate you being here, and all of you guys for coming. And as I said, I will send this out as quickly as possible. And I think the two things I was going to look for is well-priced barrels and the information about permits. So that is that. So I appreciate it, and have everybody have a great night.
Bye. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.